що, на жаль, зараз різні публічні заходи, виступи, концерти є заборонені. Але пам'ятаємо, що це тільки тимчасово. Незважаючи на тяжкі обставини, спричинені цим вірусом, пам'ятайте, що ми з вами і тяжко працюємо, щоб донести вам інформацію та новини про нашу громаду. Вітаємо вас на українській телемережі «Контакт». Я ваша ведуча Марта Чурлович, і мені буде дуже приємно провести з вами наступну годину. Сьогодні присвячуємо програму важливій даті 20 червня 1920 року. Ця дата відзначає закінчення програми інтернування українців в Канаді під час Першої світової війни. Починаємо передачу панахидою під меморіальним пам'ятником інтернування українців на площі парламенту провінції Манітоби у Вінніпезі. Панахиду, яку разом відправили митрополит Юрій Української православної церкви та митрополит Лаврентій Української католицької церкви. Раді передати офіційне звернення до нашої громади з приводу цієї важливої дати президента Конгресу українців Канади Лесі Хічі. Професор історії Любомир Луцюк більшість свого життя присвятив науковому дослідженню інтернування українців в Канаді під час Першої світової війни і сьогодні пояснює важливість правильного вивчення цих часів канадської історії. Маємо надзвичайні спогади тих часів, записані панією Дона Корчинській з Калгарі, її батьки – інтерновані українці. На кінець поминальної передачі фільмовий режисер Райан Бойко підготовив фотомонтаж в пам'ять несильно інтернованих українців в Канаді. Розпочинаємо передачу словом Бориса Сидорука, головою комітету відзначення програми інтернування українців в Канаді при Конгресі українців Канади, який склав квіти під пам'ятник інтернованих в Castle Mountain в національному парку в Banff National Park.
Конгрес українців Канади 20 червня відзначує століття закінчення програми насильного інтернування українців в Канаді під час Першої світової війни.
Hello, добрий день. My name is Boris Sidorik. I am chair of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress National Internment Centenary Committee and the chair of the Ukrainian Canadian Civil Liberties Foundation. Today we have gathered together to mark the 100th anniversary of the end of a dark chapter in Canadian history. I am standing in front of the Castle Mountain Internment Camp statue and plaque in Banff National Park. June 20th, 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of the end of Canada's first national internment operations. Men, women, and children fell victim to pre-war racism, made all worse by wartime xenophobia. They were transported to 24 camps across the country and there forced to do heavy labor for the profit of their jailers. Having been lured to the Dominion of Canada with promises of freedom and free land, they found themselves instead exploited for their labor, interned without just cause, subjected to state-sanctioned censures that would have a lasting effect, and indeed a crippling impact on the organized Ukrainian community in Canada for many decades thereafter. We are honored that the metropolitans of the Ukrainian Catholic and Ukrainian Orthodox churches in Canada will co-celebrate a requiem to hallow the victims of Canada's first national internment operations. We will also hear from Alexander Hichi, National President of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Professor Lubomir Latyuk of the Royal Military College and Director of Research for the Ukrainian Canadian Civil Liberties Association will speak about the history of the internment operations. And we will have the opportunity to speak with Donna Korczynski, a descendant of an internee, about the trauma suffered by families of those that were interned. Today, we remember the victims of this injustice and commit ourselves to ending oppression around the world. As we pay tribute to the victims of Canada's First World War internment operations, we reaffirm our commitment to the principles and freedom and dignity of all human beings, principles upon which our great country was built. By acknowledging that as Canadians we sometimes fail to adhere to our highest principles, we remind ourselves that we have a shared responsibility to ensure justice for all citizens of Canada and the world. May the bitter lessons of the past guide us to a better and brighter future. Once again, thank you for joining us today. May the memory of the victims be eternal. Вічная їм пам'ять.
Проєкт відзначення 20 червня спонсорований Канадським фондом визнання інтернування під час Першої світової війни.
Починаємо передачу панахидою під меморіальним пам'ятником інтернуванню українців на площі парламенту провінції Манитоби у Вінніпезі. Панахиду, яку разом відправили митрополит Юрій Української православної церкви та митрополит Лаврентій Української католицької церкви.
Конгрес українців Канади 20 червня відзначує століття закінчення програми насильного інтернування українців в Канаді під час Першої світової війни.
У блаженному Устині вічний спокій, подай, Господи, спочилим рабам Твоїм, інтернованим жертвам, батькам, матерям, дітям, братам і сестрам нашим і сотвореним вічною прийняв ти, Господи. Пам'ять про них нехай буде з роду в рід. Нехай святиться ім'я Твоє, нехай прийде царство Твоє, нехай буде воля Твоя, як на небі, так і на землі. Хліб наш насущний дай нам сьогодні, і прости нам провини наші, як і ми прощаємо винуватцям нашим. І не веди нас у спокусу, але визволи нас від лукавого. Бо Твоє є царство і сила, і слава Отця і Сина, і Святого Духа, нині повсякчас і на віки вічні. Дякуємо всім, що прийшли сьогодні вшанувати пам'ять інтернованих українців, які під час Першої світової війни були інтерновані по цілій Канаді. Нехай пам'ять про них у Бога буде вічною, і поки ми на землі, щоб і в нас ця пам'ять була про них.
Thank you to everyone who has taken part and joined in this prayer service where we commemorate all those who suffered and died during that terrible period of internment during the First World War. May their memories be eternal. Вічна їм пам'ять.
Проєкт відзначення 20 червня спонсорований Канадським фондом визнання інтернування під час Першої світової війни.
Раді передати офіційне звернення до нашої громади з приводу цієї важливої дати президента Конгресу українців Канади Лесі Хічі.
Конгрес українців Канади 20 червня відзначує століття закінчення програми насильного інтернування українців в Канаді під час Першої світової війни.
Від імені Конгресу українців Канади щиро дякую всім учасникам сьогоднішнього вшанування століття завершення канадських національних операцій інтернування під час Першої світової війни. Операції інтернування – це ганебна сторінка в історії нашої канадської батьківщини. Ці операції, в першу чергу, це трагедія індивідуальних людей та сімей. Тисячі людей без будь-якої причини зазнали важких несправедливостей з боку федерального уряду, уряд, який мав би захищати ті ж самі права, які сам уряд порушував. Тисячі невинних людей, які не вчинили жодного злочину, зазнали втрату своїх громадських прав, були позбавлені свого майна та були ув'язнені в таборах, де були змушені виконувати рабську працю. Я вперше дізналася про операції інтернування в середині 80-х років. Це майже 70 років після прийняття закону про військові заходи, The War Measures Act, на підставі якого проводилися ці операції інтернування. Будучи адвокатом, мені було важко прийняти таке припинення цивільних свобод. Ось чому в 1985 році, коли Отава прагнула внести зміни до закону про військові заходи, замінивши його на закон про готовність до надзвичайних ситуацій, the Emergency Preparedness Act, я працювала з комісією з питань громадянських свобод під керівництвом покійного Івана Григоровича. Ми звернулися до постійної комісії Сенату Канади, яка перевіряла зміни до цього закону, і нагадали їм про перші національні операції інтернування в Канаді і про те, наскільки важливо нам бути пильними в захисті громадянських свобод в умовах кризи. Мусимо пам'ятати, що в ті часи, навіть в 1988 році, ця темна сторінка історії Канади була в основному забута, і навіть її заперечували деякі члени канадського Кабміну. Для того, щоб забезпечити протистояння проти будь-яких форм дискримінації, важливо, щоб ми продовжували навчати нашу молодь та все канадське суспільство про цю несправедливість. Я дякую всім, які віддано працюють, щоб забезпечити це знання, в тому числі Канадський фонд по визнанню інтернування, який від 2008 року виділив більше ніж $5 мільйонів на гранти важливим проєктам, які розказують суспільству про інтернування. Сьогодні, коли ми вшановуємо пам'ять жертв канадських національних операцій інтернування, ми згадуємо, що сьогодні ще існує несправедливість та дискримінація. Це щоденна реальність для багатьох людей. Ми єднаємось в нашій рішучості боротися проти дискримінації та покласти край несправедливості, де б вони не проявлялися.
Проєкт відзначення 20 червня спонсорований Канадським фондом визнання інтернування під час Першої світової війни.
Професор історії Любомир Луцюк більшість свого життя присвятив науковому дослідженню інтернування українців в Канаді під час Першої світової війни і сьогодні пояснює важливість правильного вивчення цих часів канадської історії.
Конгрес українців Канади 20 червня відзначує століття закінчення програми насильного інтернування українців в Канаді під час Першої світової війни.
I'm going to talk today about how I first came to know about Canada's first national internment operations. I think that's a story that many of your viewers have no idea about. It all began around 1978 here in Kingston, Ontario. I was a young graduate student then, just beginning my MA in historical geography under the direction of Professor Peter Goheen at Queen's University. And Peter told me that I should study the history of Kingston's very small Ukrainian community. And quite frankly, I was not keen on that. It seemed to me, as the son of post-Second World War Ukrainian political refugees, so-called DPs, that I already knew that community. I'd grown up in it. There were some interwar immigrants that I also knew from our parish hall and from church. And I didn't think that there was much of a story there. Nothing really I could say that would be useful or interesting. Survivors. Now, there were very, very few survivors, as you can imagine, by the time we got around to doing this work. Yuri Louvet, in his very good film, Freedom Had a Price, interviews one of them. And at the very end of that film, and you hear this gentleman saying, I don't want to talk about this very much because they could come after me again. They could imprison me again. So there was fear. There was a desire to get on with their lives. There was fear. Then comes, of course, the Great Depression, the Second World War. People sort of buried this story. And so we had that reluctance and that pushback at the very beginning. When we were articulating, well, what is it, what do you want? Obviously, the media asks you this, government asks you, what do you want from all of this? And I wasn't quite sure at first how to answer it. And I found the answer by speaking to Mary Manco Haskett. Mary Manco Haskett was born in Montreal. She was just over 6 years old when her entire family was rounded up and transported by rail to the remote community of it becomes known as Spirit Lake. It's in the Abitibi in northwest central Quebec. It was essentially in the middle of the boreal forest of the Abitibi. And it became one of the largest internment camps, mainly populated by Ukrainians. There were a few others there, but mainly Ukrainians, including families, including men, women, and children. When Mary was there, her sister, Nellie, died there. We still don't actually know where Nellie is buried, for sure. There's a small cemetery that unfortunately has fallen into disrepair. It's one of the things we're trying to still restore. But at Spirit Lake, Mary was there for 2 or 3 years. And when they finally were released, paroled back to Montreal, their little green grocery shops, kind of a corner store, had been confiscated. They'd lost that. So as soon as the war ended, they actually returned to Europe, went back to what becomes interwar Poland, Western Ukraine, Halychina. They come back again to Canada just before the Second World War because they could see the writing on the wall. So Mary one day gets in touch with me, and she tells me this fascinating story. She says, I saw an article that you and Bogdan Kordan co-authored in the Globe and Mail. And I want to talk to you about that because I was in one of those camps. So I looked up Mary. She was living in Hamilton then. She's long since passed, God rest her soul. And I went to interview her. And by then, of course, I knew much more about the internment operation. So the interview went better. I could ask her questions. She'd only been 6.5, 7 years old when she was there, so she couldn't tell us very much. But she did what she could. And I sort of asked her, I said, Mary, you're aware of the fact that the National Association of Japanese Canadians is getting compensation. Individual survivors are getting money, $22,000 to $23,000 each or whatever it was. And I said, do you want money? Do you want an apology? And Mary looked at me and she said, Lubomir, if you and your friends are going to organize a campaign around this, your campaign should be about memory, not money. Wow. Here was a person who had experienced the indignity of being rounded up. She was a Canadian-born Montrealer with the rest of her family, sent to an internment camp where her father was forced to do heavy labor for the profit of his jailers. She watches as her sister die there. And she's not bitter. And she's not saying, pay me. She's not talking about intergenerational trauma or anything like that. She's not talking about, the descendants have to be paid off. She said, no, there should be no payments. Why should a Canadian today, and I will repeat this, why would a Canadian today have to apologize to me for something that, maybe his great-grandfather or grandfather did to my parents? Today's Canadians don't owe me an apology for what someone did almost 100 years ago. And she said, compensation for what? To who? And she said, certainly not to descendants, because they didn't suffer it. I did. And I don't want anything. What I want your campaign to be about is memory. And why did she emphasize that? Well, here's the story. Here's that part of the story. One day, Mary Manco is reading the Globe and Mail. She sees this article. And she calls me up to get to talk to me about what she'd experienced. And when I go to see her, she tells me that she, as a mother, had tried to tell her own children about her experiences in the First World War. And they didn't believe her own children. They said, "Mom, how could you have been interned in Canada? We've never heard about that in school. We haven't seen any movies, there's no books. You must be thinking about something that happened in the old country, in Ukraine, and all that you know. Maybe, when you went back there in the interwar period, maybe it was something happened and you're a repressed memory or something like that." So Mary's own children, Fran Haskett and so on, and they ended up being very good friends and supporters of the UKLA and so on. But at the time, originally, they didn't believe their own mother. And so they did a reasonable thing, though. If I said to you, I was held in this camp called Spirit Lake. Okay, well, it's in Quebec. Okay, Mom, here's an atlas of Canada. They opened it up. Here's the province of Quebec. All the places are shown there. Show us where Spirit Lake is. She couldn't. She couldn't, not because she didn't know the name or didn't know roughly the place it was on the map, but the name had been changed. The name was changed from Spirit Lake to Lake Beauchamp. And so she couldn't find Spirit Lake. And so her own children, until both Anna and I wrote that piece in the Globe and Mail, didn't believe their own mother. So this is why it was so important for us to recover this memory, to put up plaques across Canada, to put up statues done by our good friend John Boxtel at Castle Mountain, at Spirit Lake, the interned Madonna holding a child, walking with another child, recalling this episode in Canadian history. Some people say, well, if you don't learn your history, you're forced to repeat it. And the flip side of that is what we learn from history is that we don't learn anything from history. Somewhere in the middle, I think, is the truth. I think we can learn from history. This was an important episode in Ukrainian Canadian history. I think it crippled our settler pioneer community. People who had been lured to Canada with promises of freedom and free land overnight found themselves classified as enemy aliens because they were carrying Austro-Hungarian passports. Some of them, over 8,000, were herded into internment camps across the country. What little wealth they had was taken away from them. Not all of it was returned. They were forced to do heavy labor for the profit of their jailers in remote frontier hinterlands. Ukrainians and other Eastern Europeans were categorized as second-class prisoners of war, even though they were civilians, and put in these hard labor camps, whereas first-class German prisoners were held in places like Fort Henry. They lost the right to vote. The newspapers were censored. There were selective deportations. And the internment operations continued until June 20th, 1920. Now, again, your listeners will know, your viewers will know, that the war, the First World War, the Great War, ends with the armistice on the 11th of November, 1918. But the internment operations continue under the direction of General Sir William Dillon Otter until June 20th, 1920. So what we're recalling this year on June 20th is in fact just that, the end of the internment operations, the 100th anniversary, the centennial. And with the statues, with the plaques, with the various commemorative and educational projects funded by the Endowment Council of the Canadian First World War Internment Recognition Fund, we have in fact created a corpus, a body of art and literature and plaques and statues and information online and in books and so on that is available to everyone from grade schoolers to teachers, to scholars, to visitors to Canada who are traveling and see these statues or see these plaques. Again, one of the very early statues that we unveiled was at Castle Mountain in Banff National Park. And I mean, we all know it's just reopened. Banff is the jewel in the crown of the national park system. Many visitors don't know that that park, many of the roads and bridges and so on, were built by enemy alien labor, forced labor, under guard. When we were unveiling the first statue at Castle Mountain, I will always remember, the ceremony had ended, we were just starting to break apart, and a car came down the highway, and two young men, very well dressed, nice car, got out and said, what's the crowd about? And they came up to me and asked me, and I said, well, we're commemorating the internment of Ukrainians in this place during the First World War. And these turned out to be two nice American Jewish boys from New York City. Where else? Visiting Banff. One, no surprise, doctor, the other one, lawyer, right? Two buddies. And they come and they go, we never heard about this. So I took those two young men and I walked them across the street and down the way a bit and actually walked them onto the physical site of the internment camp. And we could still pull barbed wire out of the ground. Now, those two guys will never forget that in Canada in the First World War, Ukrainians and other Europeans were interned as enemy aliens. That's a powerful message to send. So all sorts of positive things have been done. And let me just share a few of them. If viewers go to the National Museum of History, the Canadian National Museum of History in Gatineau, Ottawa-Gatineau, there is a permanent exhibit about Canada's first national internment operations now, thanks to the work of the Endowment Council. People may read Bourdain's scholarly book, No Free Men, about the internment episode. I mean, this has been published by McGill Queen's University Press. It's available in serious libraries everywhere. There are the films by Ryan Boyko now, which complement what Yuri Louvet did in the beginning. There are teacher's guides so that any teacher anywhere in Canada can work with his or her Ministry of Education, because it's part of the curriculum of every province. And they can use those teachers' guides that we've prepared, teaching aids, to tell the story. They're allowed to do it, but many teachers say, well, I don't have material about that. Yes, you do now. If you're traveling across the country, you can stop at various places where there will be permanent exhibits, not just the Canadian Museum of History, but think, for example, too, at Banff. Thanks to the work of the Endowment Council and UCLA in particular, we now have a permanent exhibit at Cave and Basin, which was one of the sites of the internment camps, about Canada's first national internment operations. Now, I'm going to admit, because I think it's important that we recognize it, that when we're working with all levels of government and municipalities and federal, provincial, we always have to negotiate the story. And sometimes we're not always happy with the story as it's presented in some of these facilities. So at Cave and Basin, I think the story of the internment operations was somewhat deliberately watered down by Parks Canada because they don't want to tell the whole story in all its unpleasantness. There will be a Heritage Minute. I think many of your viewers will know what a Heritage Minute is. They see them in the movie theaters and on CBC and so on. A Heritage Minute is being done about the internment operations. That will be seen by millions of people. So there are a whole range of projects, everything from a plaque on a wall somewhere to a statue to a physical building in Banff. Several million people go to Banff every year in a normal year. And, some of them are going to go to that free exhibit and see it and learn. People are going to see the Heritage Minute. People are going to pick up the books. Teachers are going to use the materials. We're still teaching the teachers. We're still talking, as I am today, about the internment operations to get the story out. Because it's a profoundly Canadian story, but it's also a story that affected our community and others between 1914 and 1920 and had a lasting, I think, crippling impact. The fragmentation of our community politically, socially, religiously dates back to these same years. The tension between right and left, the tension between Pravoslavny and Catholic, all of this starts then. And it's only now being healed. It's only now being healed. And I frankly think that, if I can just add this on, you will remember, I'm sure, that on VE Day, the 8th of May this year, that was the 75th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day, our plan was to unveil and bless a commemorative stained glass window in London, England, honoring the Ukrainian Canadians who volunteered for service overseas during the Second World War, and who, after the war, some of them remained in Europe and helped save the DPs. So I wouldn't be sitting here in Kingston talking to you if it hadn't been for the Ukrainian Canadians who helped save the DPs, people like Bogdan Panchuk, Stanley Frolik, Tony Yaramovich, and Kharpliva, and Chamielsky, and many, many more, Bill Kiraduk, many, many more. Okay? Those men and women went overseas, saved the DPs. My parents came here. I was born here. And when I think about it now, what do I think about it? I think those men and women in uniform were the sons and daughters of the internees, of the enemy aliens. And Panchuk used to tell me, we volunteered, for patriotic reasons, for adventure, all the normal things that people volunteer to go fight in a war for. But we also wanted to demonstrate our loyalty. We wanted to prove that we were loyal. And so Ukrainians were overrepresented in the Canadian military and merchant marine during the Second World War, in part because they were still feeling the consequences of the internment operations. They knew what had happened to Ukrainians in World War I when we were the enemy alien. They wanted to prove by putting on the uniform that they were not disloyal, that they were in fact loyal, patriotic Canadians. And they earned the right then to speak to government and to help save the DPs. And so now I'm the son of DPs. I'm an old man now, but we covered the story of the internment operations. We told that story, and now we're honoring the veterans of World War II who saved my parents. So there's a circle here. And I think that, the more I think about it, the more excited I get, because finally, I think in the 21st century, we as a community can move forward on a different plane. It's no longer going to be, no, to staro probuli, novi probuli, and those are the pioneers set their stock, and those are the assimilated fifth generation or the fourth wave and all this kind of stuff. There will always be immigrants coming. There will always be different perspectives. But in terms of the major story between 1891, the beginning of settlement in Canada, and the present day, we have the sons and daughters of the DPs have thanked the veterans who saved our parents by remembering what happened to the veterans' parents and grandparents. So it's a nice completion. I feel very satisfied that in my career as an academic, going all the way back as we started with Mrs. Kharatinyuk on Colburn Street, she not only told me about Nick Sakaluk, but she gave me one other tip, and that was, you should talk to a man called Bogdan Panchuk. He lives in Montreal. I think he's a teacher. He would know a lot about things, about Ukrainian things in Canada. And again, I had no clue who he was, but I went and saw him, and he and Nick Sakaluk, between the two of them, Bogdan Panchuk, Nick Sakaluk, changed my whole life. There you go.
Проєкт відзначення 20 червня спонсорований Канадським фондом визнання інтернування під час Першої світової війни.
Маємо надзвичайні спогади тих часів, записані панією Дона Корчинській з Калгарі. Її батьки – інтерновані українці.
Конгрес українців Канади 20 червня відзначує століття закінчення програми насильного інтернування українців в Канаді під час Першої світової війни.
Hello, my name is Donna Kurczynski. I'm in Calgary. My step-grandfather, Harry Levitsky, we called him Dito Levitsky, was interned at Castle Mountain during World War I. I remember Dito at home. He lived in his own little house in a small cottage on my parents' yard right next door. His passion was Hockey Night in Canada. Oh my gosh, he loved it. He loved Frank Mahavlich. Oh my gosh. And he shared meals at our table, so we talked a lot. We got to know him. But his secret history of his internment was locked inside of him. He wasn't alone. Like my Dito, so many of the stories of the internees were lost because they would not talk about that part of their lives. When I was growing up, I didn't have a clue about the internment. Nobody talked about it. And not my Dito, not my parents, nobody. So to this day, I don't know if it was because it was too shameful to talk about or too painful, or maybe they thought it was not important enough. But I doubt that. I will never know. As a journalist, I had a lot of questions. The answers would have helped me piece the story together. I had so many questions. What was it like being imprisoned in the mountains of Banff, one of the most beautiful places in the world? What was it like in winter when it was 30 below, 20, 30 below? What did you wear? What was it like at night? Did you have enough covers? What did you talk about with the other prisoners? Or were you allowed to talk to the other prisoners? Did you have enough to eat to get you through a long, grueling day, pounding spikes on the railroad tracks? How did they treat you? And what was it like in the summer, in the sweltering heat? Did you have enough water to drink? All those questions never got answered. How I came to learn about the internment was when I became president of the Ukrainian Professional Business Federation. It was the time I met scholars like Lyubomir Lechuk and Bogdan Kordan and the Toronto lawyer John Gregorovich, and here in Calgary, Boris Sidorik. I saw them working passionately to tell the world about the internment, about the injustice, and they were seeking redress for this injustice inflicted on our Ukrainian community by the Canadian government of that day. So it kept on nagging at me. Why didn't I learn about it at home? The only thing I knew, as I learned later, was that when my step-grandfather, Harry Levitsky, came back from the camp, he asked my father to write a letter to the Canadian government because he believed at the time that he was entitled to pay 25 cents a day for every day he was interned at the camp. So my father wrote a letter to the government. I don't know what department he would have written it to. He wrote the letter to the government and he received no answer. And he didn't pursue it anymore. You know, Ukrainians were polite, especially in those days. You know, as a journalist at the time, I was searching for answers. I went to the Glenbow Museum, to the archives here in Calgary. What I found were not stories. I found photos, but also what I found were cold, dispassionate log entries. It was from the commanders of the camp. It was like military business as usual. There were no descriptions of the hardships in the severe winter weather, or the sweltering heat of summer, or the lack of warm clothing, or the lack of food, or the lack of water, or even the drudgery or heartbreaking pounding, the backbreaking pounding of digging and lifting. The irony was that they mentioned the attempted escapees or the deaths, and they were just almost like a footnote, one line. So-and-so escaped, so-and-so died. That was it. I also found my grandfather's name. Well, it was there, but it was spelled badly. I barely recognized it. You know, 100 years have gone by since that internment. And today, in spite of the anger, more than ever, you know, we need to continue to talk about the internment to our neighbors, to our community, to our children. They need to know about that injustice. We need to keep talking and talking and talking about it. By talking about it, it will help us to understand who we are, and it will help non-Ukrainians also to know who we are. We have a part in the fabric of Canada, one of sacrifice, one of pain, and one of pride. In spite of our anger, we must forgive. Yes, it was a wrong. If we do not forgive, we're stuck. And what happens? We remain as perpetual victims. It would destroy us from the inside. It would destroy us individually, and it would destroy us as a community. We don't want that. To observe this anniversary of our dark history, why don't you take a drive out to Banff? Visit Castle Mountain, see the old campsite, the plaque, make a pilgrimage to the cave and basin, and read the stories. And stand there and imagine for yourself the men suffering, physically tired, cold, hungry, lonely, and hopeless. Hear their voices, see their faces, see their tears. You can feel their energy there. And thank these men for their sacrifices and release your anger, like I did. And I thank my Tito for being part of that story.
Проєкт відзначення 20 червня спонсорований Канадським фондом визнання інтернування під час Першої світової війни.
На кінець поминальної передачі фільмовий режисер Райан Бойко підготовив фотомонтаж в пам'ять насильно інтернованих українців в Канаді.
Конгрес українців Канади 20 червня відзначує століття закінчення програми насильного інтернування українців в Канаді під час Першої світової війни.
Конгрес українців Канади 20 червня відзначує 100-ліття закінчення програми насильного інтернування українців в Канаді під час Першої світової війни. Проєкт відзначення 20 червня спонсорований Канадським фондом визнання інтернування під час Першої світової війни.